and we all have our 15 minutes of fame, and I'd like to take a couple of my 15 minutes to talk about the rights and the wrongs in the world of professional wrestling.
And it is for the WWE Championship.
This match is for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship.
The World Heavyweight Championship.
The match and new NWA Heavyweight Champion.
We appreciate you guys coming out and taking your time to support women's wrestling in America.
This match is for the AWA World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship.
This is a bonus episode. I don't do these very often. I think the last time that I did one was with the Tonga Twins situation from several months ago. I don't even know if that's progressed at all since I talked about it then. But that was the last time I did any sort of bonus episode. Here, however, it is not about any one particular person or team or entity for that particular matter, outside of WoW, that is. This is because, surprisingly enough, when we talked about the PWI and their top 250, I got a little bit more emails, direct messages, comment than I expected that I would, based on that. And I don't mean necessarily just from the listenership that might be out there. For those of you that, participate and send me comments and messages every once in a while. Without going too deep into it, I mean talking to actual participants who feel like they have been somewhat overlooked. And I get it. I get it. I absolutely do. Especially when this is something that you take pride in and this is your craft and you want to be respected and you want to be recognized for being good at what you do. Every job that or position that I have created for myself or in a broadcast, production, artistic, entertainment, whatever endeavor, once I made the decision to myself that I wanted to be good at it, I wanted some recognition for it as well. And I understand, for that reason alone, I understand it. When I was in my 20s and early 30s, I wanted to, I was doing a lot of illustration and art. And I can tell there's nothing like getting praise or recognition for it. There's nothing like it. I did a short film, which I thought was as basic can be. But because I put it in black and white, and I sent it to, and that was on the suggestion of a friend of mine. It's like, why don't you take the color out and put it in black and white? And he was right. Put it in black and white, and gave it an artistic feel. And I went to a film festival over it. And I can absolutely, positively tell you, there's nothing more validating than being in that room, watching your stuff on that big screen, in a room of people that are watching it along with you, and more or less validating your creativity or your work. So, and I would imagine that wrestling and wrestlers are not that much different. In this particular case, the validation comes from people like me, the podcasters. It comes from wrestling media and other places like that. But the problem when you do not get, it's not even that you don't get recognized by wrestling media. They don't say anything, I should rephrase that. It's not even that you don't get good praise by wrestling media. Sometimes it's not recognized at all, and that can hurt. But I also recognize that part of that, I'm not even going to say part of it, scratch that, all of it, is not the fault of the talent. It's simply not. It is a combination of a lot of things. It's death by 1,000 cuts, but most of those cuts come at the behest of the company that they are involved in. And it's unfortunate, but it's the truth. The company that these young ladies are involved in, by and large, do not do much to lend itself towards wrestling media wanting to cover them. And that's just a fact. If you put hashtag Wow Wrestling, let's just say on Instagram right now, you'll probably get a couple of, it'll probably say something along the lines of there's a 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 posts that are relative to that. But then put in, hashtag TNA Wrestling and see how many you get. It's like 20 times the amount. It's not covered enough. That alone, that right there alone is probably every reason that is not talked about in most podcasts, why it's not covered in most wrestling media and websites, certainly not in any magazines that may still exist. It doesn't get enough attention. It doesn't get enough to where it's going to drive any numbers. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. It is always about business. And I don't want to say that it's an indictment of talent, because it's not. It's not an indictment of talent. WoW has several top level talents on their roster right now. They do. But they're buried underneath WoW. And the brand of WoW, let's just go ahead and let's give a hard truth about that company right now. The brand of WoW means nothing to the wrestling fan base overall. Oh, they have their fans. And yes, within the WoW bubble, that you're going to have people who are going to praise it and they're going to love it and they're going to go nuts for it and they're going to say this match is great, this is fire, you look amazing, all the same praise that you get on a week-to-week basis or whenever some social media post goes up, whether that's Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. They're going to come out for those things and they're going to say it. But this is, it's kind of like what people say about AEW on a very small scale. That AEW fans exist in a bubble and they just accept whatever AEW does. And if you don't get it, too bad. They love the product no matter what, no matter whether it makes sense or not. That's a lot of what WoW fans are. They just accept WoW for what WoW is, and they do not need nor want explanation. The rest of the world does. But that aside, the numbers aside, because that is a very big part of why WoW doesn't get covered at all. Because it will make no difference to PWI, Cage Match, Russell Votes, Cultaholic, whoever that you want to put it will make no difference to them whether they put a video up about WoW or an article about WoW or a post about WoW up or not. Because ultimately, the money is driven by WWE and AEW. That's the first thing. And believe me, if I wanted to turn around and be like, I need to get some more views, I would be doing AEW right now. Because AEW just on name alone, people search that out just to hate listen sometimes about what you say that AEW is doing wrong. Nobody does that for WoW. They don't care. And it's unfortunate. And maybe that's kind of a blessing in disguise. I don't know. Because WoW has been wildly inconsistent. And I don't know if anybody outside of WoW wants wrestling media to see how inconsistent it is, to be talking about it on a regular basis. But because this has come up, I sat and I wrote down a lot of what I felt were very, very valid reasons as to why A, PWI did not address WoW, and why B, the wrestling media as a whole does not address WoW. And I'd like to go through some of those as we are on this bonus episode. So let's go through a few of those right now. First off, we're going to start with the PWI, why they didn't do it. PWI, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. For those of you who do not know what that, the initials stand for, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Every year, they do the PWI 500, and it's usually listed for the men, but then they have a PWI. It started off with 50. I think now it's moved up to 250. PWI is 250 top women in the industry. Would it hurt them to list a WoW wrestler within that 250? Probably not. But PWI also has their own criteria for their evaluation. And I know I talked about this when I brought it up before, but we are going to go into detail now. Let's start with the evaluation period. The evaluation period for PWI was October 1st, 2023 to September 30th, 2024. The criteria we went through some time ago, that's in-ring achievement, influence, technical ability, competition, and activity. Those are the criteria as listed by PWI. So let's go down the road. In-ring achievement for them is wins and losses, the records of which, by the way, win-loss records, championships, and tournaments won. Now, once they included tournaments in that, it already knocks WoW down. It already gives WoW a check against them, because WoW has not ever given a decent tournament. Ever. Here's what I wrote. WoW devalues their wins and losses. On their own show, we've seen WoW reslot people, teams that have already lost in tournaments, wild card people who've lost qualifiers, number one contenders matches that have gone nowhere. If WoW can't treat it seriously, why would anyone else? Honestly, I defy anybody in that company to say that that's different or that's wrong. We've seen it on their own programming. People can lose and then go right into a number one contenders match. If they have a tournament, no problem. We'll just reslot you because it's a fluid tournament, as David calls it, which is stupid because there's no such thing as a fluid tournament. If you can't run a tournament properly, then don't run the tournament. The wild card rule is a lazy rule. Because if we just have to stick somebody in there all of a sudden, then we'll just say wild card. I like Penelope Pink, but the fact that she was in the quote gauntlet match in episode 25, the one that I hate, tells you everything. She lost a qualifier against Princess Ozzy to even be in that thing, and then she showed up in it anyway. So what was the match for? If you can't give stakes to anything, why are we doing it? And WoW has a hard time giving stakes, legitimate stakes, to matches and tournaments and number one contenders matches. I mean, they have a hard time doing it. I'm not saying that every single match that airs on TV has to have some sort of consequence behind it. But when you apply a consequence on your show, then the consequence should stand for some level. I mean, you might lose it here and there. But you should be able to say, hey, look, this is the number one contenders match. This person won it, so they're going for the title. As I'm recording this, we've had like 4 or 5 number one contender matches in a row. one of which they are currently overlooking like it never happened. Jesse Jones pinned other people pink too. Now it's just Nigel is saying, well, yeah, you have a reasonable argument because you just beat Princess Aussie. They completely ignored that we just had a number one contestant match with Jesse Jones. If they can't treat it the same, with any sort of seriousness or consequence, why would the fans? It makes it very easy just to skip it. Influence. The next thing, visibility and prestige within a promotion and or the industry. That is the criteria that is listed by PWI. I wrote, WOW carries no prestige in the wrestling industry. Saddled with the legacy of Glow, too many start and stop reigns for championships. David McLane and Jeanie Buss are presented as a larger component of WOW than anyone in/on his roster. And that's the truth. When they do press, I'm not saying that David McLane and Jeanie Buss should not be there. But they are presented as a larger component than anybody else there. There is no top babyface. Never mind the fact that they send like a mixed message. Anytime they do these press releases, they just grab whoever they feel like grabbing. Like they could be a full-on heel on TV, but then you're expected to go on to IGN and talk about the virtues of WOW and being a superhero and standing up for what's right and all that. Like, aren't you bad on TV? Why are you here? Jeanie Buss has no idea what WOW's about other than it's in her portfolio. And it makes her look good that she's helping other people out. Only David McLane has ever been able to, in the interviews I saw, he's the only one that gets up there and is able to say anything of any sort of merit to WOW, which does what? It draws attention back to him. And like I said earlier in that statement I put down, they are saddled with the legacy of Glow. Glow was never taken seriously. Never. It was never taken seriously. It was just campy TV that existed in a wrestling format. And WOW has the unfortunate burden of being actively and constantly compared to that. David McLane being there does not help it. The next thing, technical ability, variety of moves, and quality of matches and in-ring storytelling. Now, I'm certainly not going to say that there's no one there that's capable of doing that because that would just be ridiculous. I just saw it a week ago. Reina Del Rey versus Tika Jamaro. They told a story in the ring. There was no angle. There was no feud. There was nothing leading into that. The story had to be told bell to bell, and they did it. But here's what I wrote about WOW as to why they probably get overlooked. Several talented wrestlers that are there are capable of telling a story bell to bell. But WOW also has several talents on the roster that no matter how good and or talented they are, only have a few months, if not weeks, of experience and aren't capable yet. WOW's hiring practices will always short them in this department. I don't think it needs to be any further explained than that. I mean, you could pretty much tell what was going on there. WOW's hiring practices will always short them in this department. Technical ability. It's the same thing I said about, how people perceive that promotion. When one person screws up on WOW, it's not an indictment of that person. It's an indictment of the promotion or the show. That's all it takes. And when they hire people who are, I'm sure they have all the best intentions in the world. I'm sure they are very nice people, athletic, and this, that, and the other. But when you hire somebody who had no, and this is not a knock on them, but who had no intentions of ever getting into the wrestling industry. They win the audition, and good on them for doing it, and they train and they learn how to do the moves and whatnot. And then they're on TV 3 months, 4 months, maybe 5, 6 months later on national television. It's plenty of people out there on the wrestling circuit right now who are extremely talented who have never gotten on national TV. And so that's probably a knock against WoW as it is. But getting past the fact that there's other people out there that could be on national TV, the fact that you have these other ones here works against everyone because they probably are not capable of having a full-on match and telling the story bell to bell. The little things, yeah, they could do the big moves, and I absolutely love Erica Porter for this statement that she said years ago to me. WoW taught me how to do the moves. The Indies taught me why. That was the most concise way to explain it, and it made the most sense. And like I said, I love her for that. The next thing there is competition. Success against the most varied. Sorry, I don't know why I put varied. The success against the most varied and highest quality opponents. I wrote, although WoW has a talented roster, very few there have the credibility to raise WoW's profile. The ones that do assume new names and personas. So that goes back to it's a WoW thing. Because you're not wrestling Jesse Bell, you're wrestling Jesse Jones. You're not wrestling Holly Hood, Haley J, you're wrestling Holly Swag. You're not wrestling Amazing Maria, you're wrestling Big Rig Betty. You're not wrestling Razor. Goddamn, I got her name dropped out of my head all of a sudden. But you're wrestling Reina Del Rey. Yeah, I mean, you get where I'm going here. It's not BK, it's not Killer Kate, it's BK Rhythm, and so on and so forth. So once they leave out of that bubble, it loses something. They don't get to rack up the win-loss record for Reina Del Rey outside of WoW. Or BK Rhythm outside of WoW. Or Holly Swag outside of WoW. They are exclusive to WoW. And because they are exclusive to WoW, they cannot raise the credibility of that company. Because Marina Tucker might wrestle all over the goddamn country, but Penelope Pink does not. So she doesn't get the highest quality talent unless they are already on that roster. And I can promise you, I don't work for PWI, but I can promise you they are not going to sit there and shift through the roster to see who they hired out of the back page of backpage.com or who they got off of the Indies. They probably do not care. They just is because it's not worth it to them. Activity. Minimum 10 singles non-tag matches total, or barring this, 6 such matches in separate months. I wrote, regardless to how many matches WoW talent have in a night of taping, or how many of those matches air, overall, they simply do not wrestle enough to qualify under PWI's criteria. Very few meet PWI's standard. Tormenta does, but she's an exception, not the rule. The example that I wrote down, and I went back into the that season just to check, and I chose Goldie Collins. Nothing against her, but I chose Goldie Collins to use as an example here. That year, of the evaluation period, Goldie Collins is listed as having 4 matches that season. Those were her tag matches. So that knocked some of that down. But then we go and looked at, okay, how many did she have as a singles? 2023, she's listed as having 6 singles matches. That's 4 matches short. I don't set their criteria. That is their criteria. 10. She's 4 matches short. And never mind the fact that that's 4 matches. That's 6 matches for the year. Now, does that mean that she didn't put her body on the line or that she didn't work hard or any of that stuff? No, it doesn't mean any of that. But it does mean that she did not wrestle much at all. She wrestled those 6 matches for the entirety of the year. Now, she does have some tag matches, so it's 13 overall. But you're supposed to have 10 non-tag. And that was it. And 13 in a year is not a lot. It's not. I know I've said this before. Like, I knew one indie girl who probably exceeded that amount of matches in 2 months at a minimum. Because she was wrestling all the time. And I might as well go ahead and say she was. This is some years back. But Rock and Roll Roxy. Because she wanted to do this and she was double shotting on the weekends, she probably got over 10 matches in a month. She was doing everything she could to get booked. I'll book that. If you give me opening matches right now, then I could probably make it across town to do, mid-card / main event on the other promotion later on tonight. Those things makes a big difference. And again, it is absolutely not a shot at her, at Goldie Collins. She just happened to be the one that I picked. Because she popped in my mind. I was like, well, let me just get a WoW or somebody who is specific to WoW. They don't do anything else other than WoW. That's it. And she was the one that I picked out of that. And because that exists, because she is one of a few, it comes back to the earlier statement that it is not indicative of that person. It becomes indicative of the entire show, the entire promotion. Those shortcomings that are illustrated by whomever it happens to be, whyever it happens to be, carries across everybody. It is unfair. Yes, it is absolutely unfair. But that is, in my opinion, the way that WoW is perceived. The one is an example of all. It's a shame, but yeah, the way it seems to be. But that's just the PWI's version of why WoW doesn't qualify for wrestling media. And again, it being their criteria is perfectly, within their rights, I guess. But I do think that there are other reasons that exist that WoW oftentimes is not considered or picked up or talked about by wrestling media just in general. Now, as I just said, that was the PWI, Pro Wrestling Illustrated's version of it. I'm going to give you mine's. I also sat down and really examined common themes from the moment that I started reviewing the WoW episodes, within this last incarnation at least. I sat and thought about some of this. I wish you were able to reach out to some of the people that I work with. They probably could tell you that he was working on that more than he was doing the job. It was just terrible. But no, I sat and I wrote down few pages of worth of things that I felt like really, in my opinion, and I will make sure that I express that, in my opinion, I think hinders WoW overall. And here's my list. We went through the criteria of the previous organization, magazine, website, but here it is as perceived by me. In no particular order, by the way. First thing, these are reasons why WoW isn't addressed by the wrestling media. 1, the WoW Championship isn't perceived as important. Aside from Tessa Blanchard, what other name has held the title and provided some level of credibility to it? Now, again, we're not talking about whether the person is talented or not. We're not talking about whether they had good matches. We're not talking about, anything about them personally or professionally. What we are talking about is a name that could hold on to the belt and provide a reason for the wrestling media to be concerned about it or care. That was the closest that they had. You can make an argument for Santana Garrett, which I also wrote down here. I said, true, Garrett held it, but she didn't have the opportunity to elevate it. By the time she really got it, WoW was into another hiatus. And it was a hiatus that lasted for 3 years? She never had a chance to try. So by default, she's kind of moved out of that running. The only person that had name value walking into the company would have been Blanchard. Blanchard was already on Impact Wrestling, or she was on there simultaneously as her airtime with WoW. This was around the same time that she was pushing for, the World's Championship of Impact. Already been labeled a Knockouts champion. And the march for her at that point was on to becoming the champion of that promotion. And then she had her public confrontations along with some other things. And then that just kind of burnt itself out. And being tone deaf to the situation, WoW decided to double down on it. Whereas everybody else was like, well, we probably don't need to do that. Maybe we might need to just distance ourselves from her for a little bit. Right or wrong, that was the decision that was made by other wrestling promotions. WoW chose to make a t-shirt. Nuclear Heat, Tessa Blanchard. And I was fine up until it wasn't. So almost everyone, fair or not, are perceived as WoW creations that have basically had the belt aside from 2, maybe 3 people. Your Terry Goals, your Lana Stars, your Jungle Girls, Beast, Penelope Pink. And again, that's right or wrong. Because whereas Marina Tucker is not a WoW creation, Penelope Pink is. The difference may just be the name, but that's all it takes out of perception. And that, in and of itself, I feel cuts WoW down outside of its own bubble. 2, WoW doesn't utilize or apply standard metrics for growth within pro wrestling promotions. WoW doesn't have to do the things that other wrestling promotions do. Even the ones that are on the top of the ladder that don't need to do it. Like WWE doesn't need to do the things that apply to standard wrestling promotion growth or their metrics. Here's what I wrote for that. WoW either does not try or does not need to operate the way that other promotions do. Their ticket sales don't support the show. And I think that's a safe thing to say because they don't run it often enough for any ticket sales to keep that in business. WoW doesn't stream or do pay-per-views. So fans don't get the chance to invest in the product, and neither does WoW get the chance to see if fans will invest in the product. They've largely gone places where they could be pretty safe. If they leave their own studio or the Belasco or whatever the case may be, they've gone places and shown off, and that's fine. But they've gone places where the crowd already exists. The crowd did not come to see WoW. WoW came to see the crowd. WoW has merchandise, but it is very rarely mentioned. And they do, of course, have TV, but WoW also seldom brings up or mentions the other platforms that it airs on. Some of the TV spots they have in other markets are outdated. The metadata that they use to illustrate what WoW is outdated. There are places that I've seen with my own eyes that they, if you say record it on your DVR, it'll have the old WoW logo. It'll have a description of WoW that no longer applies. Watch the WoW superheroes and AJ Mendez. It'll be things like that. Now, what they have to do to fix that across the board, I don't know. I know it exists. I know it's there. I know it happens. But these things make WoW look shortchanged, when it really shouldn't be. Out of the 4 pillars of the wrestling business, they maybe utilize one, and that's television revenue. And that's about it. Maybe you can include the angel investor, if you want to call Jeanie Buss that, but no merchandise. If you're just looking at the show, you wouldn't even know that they had shirts or merchandise at all, except for the Thunderclappers that looks to be just given out when you just look at the show. No pay-per-view, no streams. Like I said, there's no way to really tell how invested those fans are, because they don't have to be invested. And whatever else that it airs on, Vice, Pluto, having episodes available on Amazon, so on and so forth. How would you know that? The Pluto TV thing was brought up while they were on press, but have they mentioned it since then? Do you remember that they have a Pluto channel? As well as, the little things like that, like they're not going from one place to the next trying to sell tickets either. So I think that hinders him just on the outside, looking in for people who are trying to measure whether WoW is something they want to even talk about. But we'll get to those things also. Moving on. Number 3, perceived as too campy and or more of a TV show than a promotion. And this is a 2-part thing that I put here. The A part. As talented as the roster is, there will always be additions that will paint an overall narrative of WoW to most fans as just silly or campiness. For every Jesse Jones, you're going to get a Classmaster. For every Ashley Blaze, you'll probably get a Sprout Greens. And it's not as if other wrestling promotions don't have silly things. It's just that largely in WoW, very few of them are capable, allowed, or have had the opportunity to grow outside of that. And it does nothing for the overall perception of that company. The B side of it is that WoW exists in the subtle shadow of Glow, whether they acknowledge that or not. The comparison will not allow it to be taken seriously. Anytime some media outlet talks about WoW and David McLane is there, that is the instant, or at least the easiest path for them talking about it. Glow. The old 80s show, the Netflix show, it always lends itself into comparison with that, which does not help the current product because it cannot separate itself from its predecessor. Number 4, the TV production schedule. The production schedule that WoW has doesn't lend itself to it being good for the product. The way it's produced often makes it behind the time. Having people who are still visibly on the show who've already left, and in the case of the Tonga twins, had a public falling out with them. Not that that hurt WoW personally, because I'm pretty sure most of their fans barely knew that that happened. But it also makes the storytelling very inconsistent. It's like they have to try to work around the idea of, well, we won't be here week to week, and we might not know what we're doing, and we can't really put all our eggs in this basket, so we'll make this as vague as possible. And then the commentators will fill in the blanks. But that doesn't always work. It certainly doesn't work in case of trying to get your stars over. Who's over? Who in that company is over? You got a lot of people who play parts. And I'm sure there's a lot of them there that are just happy to be there. But who is over? Who on that roster right now could you put on TV and say this person will be here and it will make a visible difference in viewership? Almost nobody. I'm not even going to say, probably nobody, just in general. And that's not good. It's a shame, really. New persons come in, they definitely can't get over because they almost have to lose. They don't mention a word about who they are, why they're there, or anything else. The schedule being taped, well, last season it was, every 3 months. Doesn't give them a lot of wiggle room when you were cramming in 3 months worth of television, a full quarter of the year, into a weekend. Now is worse. It's the entire year worth of production in, a month? They wouldn't be able to change directions if they wanted to. And whatever it is that they got, let's just say for the sake of argument that Princess Ozzy got just unexpectedly hot. Fans loved her. They're sending in, emails and DMs and this, that, and the other. They wouldn't be able to do a thing about it. They wouldn't be able to alter her course or change the path so they can utilize that. They would not be able to do a single thing about it. The matches that are already done are the matches that are already done. What am I on? 6? No, 5. Okay. Number 5, no record of success or star making. Which I just started talking about in the vein of the production schedule, which is part of the reason you don't have stars, but it's more so than that. Creative has a big chunk of that too. But there is no record of success or star making out of WoW. I'm sure David McLane might argue that point or try to. Or maybe some of WoW's management might try to. There's no one there who's been made into a star because of WoW. The promotion might be made into something, but there's no individual that's happened. When I put that down as a reason, I wrote this: as long as WoW has existed, technically over 20 years, it has no record of success. Not in terms of expanding the fan base or creating stars. Independent stars have created larger buzz on their own, opposed to being glued to WoW's roster. And I'm perfectly willing to hear a difference if somebody can provide it for me, but I've yet to see anybody that has gone onto WoW's television, their nationwide television, and leave the better for it. Now, we're not talking about a paycheck that you get, but who has left there in a better, more prominent position? Nobody. I mean, honestly, no one. Even, I just used the Aussie thing that said, if she got hot all of a sudden. But let's go another step. Let's say Ashley Blaze walked in there, she won her debut match, and she gave an interview of a lifetime afterwards, and people were genuinely interested. Like, okay, wow, I need to see her again. The rotation on some talent will not lend itself for you to ever get behind them. There are times where you might not see them for weeks. AKA, look at the Beast, or look at her as an example. When's the last time you seen her? It's been months. That goes back to the point number one. The championship isn't perceived as important. It's been off the TV for 3 months. There is almost nothing there that would show anyone as having become bigger than when they walked in. Now we're on number 6. The owner isn't capable to help improvement. And the owner in this instance is Jeanie Buss. I wrote, certainly she means well, but it's fairly clear WOW isn't something that she micromanages, nor would she likely know what success for a wrestling promotion is. If she's not talked to or researched on her own about wrestling promotions or how they function or what the goals should be set or how wrestling stars are made, she's essentially at the overall whims of WOW management to tell her. The WOW management in this case being individuals like David McLane, Selena Majors, possibly Nigel Zane. They're the only ones that are going to be able to inform that to her, that she will probably listen to, which means that it's never going to change. She doesn't know how to change it. It'd be like if you had some money and you decided to open up a roller rink. But you don't really roller skate. You never really was interested on your own. You like looking at it every once in a while, but you don't care. And so you give somebody the money. What else are you going to do? You have to listen to them now because they're the closest thing that you know of that has had experience in a roller rink. That's what her roller rink is. WOW. I'm sure it looks good in her portfolio. I'm sure she likes to have it. I'm sure she feels like she's doing a service to the community at large by funding it. But she does not know how to fix that problem. First thing, she would have to know that a problem exists. And if the only persons that are capable of telling her that are the people that's already in control of it, why would they say anything? These are all valid reasons, in my opinion, as to why WOW doesn't go anywhere, why the wrestling media doesn't cover it or check into it or anything like that. And all of them tie into the other. Next, 7, inconsistent storylines and angles. Part of the byproduct of WOW's schedule of taping, like I said, it all ties in, and editing is that some angles are not either fully fleshed out, nonsensical, or dropped altogether. It becomes very difficult to emotionally invest in WOW as a product under these circumstances. You can point at the Mother Truckers angle, which theoretically should have ended with Holly Swag's turn as a big emotional to-do. And whereas I know that some people were upset and like, oh man, she turned on her mom and whatnot, there was no real drama behind that. First off, you saw the turn coming a mile away. Secondly, they gave you nothing to really be emotional about. Holly Swag was not lured into anything. She wasn't convinced or connived or anything like that. It just happened. And that's a common thread with WoW. Things just happen. One of the best examples of that I can recall in WoW is the turn of Amber Rodriguez, the former Spars, Commander Spars. And then inexplicably one day she just was a heel. And also inexplicably, when she turned heel, she was already in the middle of a feud. Which reminds me, now that I'm saying this out loud, did David McLane get his own storyline wrong? It's like, Adriana Gambino used to be tagged with Gigi Gianni as part of the Fashionistas. I thought the Fashionistas was Rodriguez and Gianni. Oh, well. But getting back to the point, it is so difficult to invest in that. That is the only angle I ever saw that began in the middle and ended that day. You didn't see the turn. You didn't see the attack, the turn, the attack. You saw the match, and then that was it. There was no build. There was no promos. There was nothing else. It just started, and it stopped before it even got rolling. I was like, I cannot believe this. WoW actually began an angle midstream. I didn't even think that was possible. But that also does not help. Who would want to cover that? An honorable mention to this as a problem. WoW, by its name, does not push numbers. That's probably one of the largest reasons that wrestling media doesn't cover it, if not the largest. But WoW doesn't push numbers. WrestleNomics would cover all wrestling promotions except for WoW. They did for a little while, and then they just stopped. The numbers were declining last I saw it. By the time he just ended it, they were around 200,000 on the average. If you were to go on Instagram right now and type hashtag WoW Wrestling, you probably get about 5,000, 6,000 mentions of it online. You do that for TNA or something like that, is almost 10 times the amount. I can't remember if I said that already, but I'm just mentioning it again because it bears mentioning. They do not drive enough interest on their product, even to people who are into wrestling, for those outlets to bother. There's almost never anything newsworthy. The newsworthy things that they had got squandered. This falls into them not pushing numbers, by the way. When AJ Mendez was part of that company, they almost did nothing to take advantage of the fact that she was there or had star power. And I said that on multiple podcasts, that they wasted that. If you weren't paying attention, you might not even know she was there. And I understand it's very likely she told him, hey, look, I don't want to wrestle, and that's perfectly understandable. If that were the case. I don't know that to be true, but if that were the case, okay, fine. But you can talk. It's been my suggestion from day one. It's like, I'm at least going to offer. Give her the money to have the return match that the world wants to see, that her fans want to. She will draw eyes to the product if she does. She might say no, but I'm asking. And then following that, if that doesn't work, and or if it doesn't work, then it's interview. We have the first sit-down interview from AJ Mendez, the former AJ Lee, former WWE Women's Champion, Divas Champion. And the first time she sat and talked about her life, her career, her goals, and why she's here, or anything wrestling related in 7 years. And it'll be here on WoW. Nothing. We got none of that. So, no, I mean, they don't do enough to drive numbers really for themselves, much less for websites that cover them. And it's far easier if your goal is to push numbers for your YouTube channel, your podcast, your website, whatever the case may be. It's a far easier thing to do to cover any other wrestling promotion. I was going to just say AEW, but now that I'm thinking about it, MLW might not be high on the list, but they still get coverage. NWA might not be high on the list, but they still get coverage. TNA is a little bit higher up there. AEW certainly. If you want numbers, just put AEW in there because people want to know either about what's going on in front of the screen of AEW or the drama behind it. But they push numbers. WoW doesn't do that. But the biggest, and before I go any further, this is my disclaimer. These things are all my opinion. If you choose to agree with that, fine, and I can certainly understand why, obviously. But so that I am clear, I'm not saying that you got to fall into what I believe, but I believe these things to be true, and I'm trying to give all my reasons why. Having said that, the biggest reason I think that it has a hard time getting coverage and or being taken seriously and or growing. That's what this list is about, all of those things. And I hate to say it, but David McLane. Just underneath Jeanie Buss as a big problem, he is. Now, he is also WoW's biggest asset. Have to put that up front. He is WoW's biggest asset, unquestionably. They wouldn't exist if he wasn't there. But he's also turned into their biggest detriment. McLane has pushed for WoW's he's willed that thing into existence. And it would not be where it is now if it were not his ability to sell the value of the show, his determination to see it done, or see it made, his producer skills, what have you. He is responsible, and I certainly want to give all credit to that before I say another word about him being a detriment. All of those things I fully believe. But that does not make the other side of the coin untrue. Both of these things can be true. That he could be an asset, and at this point, he could be a detriment. As an on-air talent and the multiple hats that he wears, he hurts the product by overshadowing angles, becoming the voice or the avatar for wrestlers so they don't speak for themselves, randomly praising things, not giving a commentator's direction to where an angle is going, being the only person that went out in public and vouched for WoW in press environments, being an authority figure that's inconsistent, being the lead commentator, the lead interviewer, the matchmaker, and being unnecessarily involved in angles and overall not being a trusted voice because he's inconsistent in presentation. It's not that he's not trusted because he gets up there and lies every which way or something like that. Little things always matter in there. And incrementally, he will do and say things that will make him untrustworthy in terms of, should I believe him as he promotes this thing as the best thing ever? Should I believe him when they say, hey, this person's going to be here next week? Should I believe him when he says, you don't want to miss this one next week, fans? As if it were, a surefire hit of a match or something like that. I can fire these people for doing one thing, but I'll reward somebody else for giving them a championship the next. I can say that this person is cheating, so I'm going to bar you from ringside, but then the next episode I can let every team and every heel possible cheat, attack, lie, whatever. And I'll just call it like, okay, well, it's just Monday. shooting down or hurting heels who should be a powerful force in the show, but because he's Dave McLane, can't do that to me. Sophia Lopez presenting him with a contract from the world's greatest attorney, allegedly, as to why her woman should have had a title match. You remember that back several months ago, about what, a season or so? What was that met with? This means nothing. And done, ended, finished. Being involved unnecessarily. How about when Abilene Maverick was trying to grab her belt and for some reason he decided to grab it too? Now, what he was going to do with it, I don't know, because she was still recognized champion. So I don't know, other than he wanted to take a comedic bump. What was it for? Who got the payoff for people attacking the Beast? David McLane became the heat for that, or at least the heat transferred to him. The Beast got attacked. She got walked out. The camera ended on his face, shaking no disapprovingly. She hadn't been back. It basically just became his thing. He offered up the reward. He got his information. He got to publicly fire these two. It was terrible. It was an awful, awful angle. But that right there was the payoff. And an incomplete payoff at that. That he got to do. Not anybody else on that roster. Certainly not the Beast. So I'm not sure what that was even for. Probably goes back to what I said before, that TV production schedule, which messes up angles and editing and this, that, and the other. Him being omnipresent on the show does not help the show. Like I said, there are oftentimes he would just drain a scene because he's too much in it. Almost trying to force an emotional scene when he came in to Candy Crush to inform her that she was getting a title match, and he just starts crying. Now, I said then, whether he meant that or not, which I doubt it, but whether he meant that or not, it didn't matter. It came off as if he was just being overbearing to the scene. He was chewing up the scenery. The Beast returning from a broken ankle, only to have it broken later on in the episode. We have a segment in the middle where she comes to tell David McLane that in his office. Why was it there if she was going to go right back out? Why did she return at all if she was going to go right back out? I don't know. But he was right smack dab in the middle of it. And I could probably go on and on with other examples of that. Now, I won't do it because, like I said, this is a little bonus episode. But as much as I can acknowledge that he is an asset to that place, he is not helping it in terms of his presentation. Almost everything else that I said here, you will be able to trace back to David McLane one way or the other. Jeanie Buss, she's not going to know anything because if she asks anybody, she's going to ask David McLane. Right? Inconsistent storylines and angles. If it was a big deal, I'm pretty sure he'd have said something about it by now. It starts and stops with him. And if he, much like the Jeanie Buss situation, if he is not aware that there's an issue or that this comes up short or that comes up short, or, I mean, as I'm recording this, I just watched an episode where they had no quality. This is like the third time things got onto their show that shouldn't have been there. Video of Princess Ozzy and Tormenta wearing tag team championship belts when they're not the champions or haven't won them. Possible footage or a graphic with the Classmaster wearing a belt. It was low, but it was there. Footage of Jay Boogie being part of the Brat Pack when she had been kicked out of it weeks ago. Things like that. That falls on his feet. And I will, I'll repeat and make sure that I'm clear. He is an asset to that company. I mean, you can make no mistake about that. But his presence there also, in my opinion, hurts it as well. He is as much a performer on that show as anybody else. And whereas there are moments where he would probably need to do that, he can overshadow at times. My suggestion for that situation is that he can do one of two things. He can either, because he seems like he likes doing commentary, and if that's what he wants, and be the babyface commentator, although I do think he needs to be off of commentary too. If he wanted to stay there and be a babyface commentator, then he should make the statement that he, while on commentary, is relinquishing that, assigning somebody else to be the authority, so that he can focus on being the commentator, the best I could be. I'm not going to hold all these positions, however he wants to phrase it. But someone else should be in that position of the figure of authority. You can't have an authority figure sit ringside while heels actively cheat. And he only do things about it when he chooses to do stuff about it. So that's one option. Takes the heat off of him, certainly. And the company. The other option is simple. Remove himself from commentary, so that he can be the authority figure. And then you come out when it's necessary. When there's a big thing that needs to be taken care of, then you make your presence known. But that's it. It's those things, in my opinion, are as much a reason as to why WoW has not progressed, grown, what have you, as a company. Does not seem to fall in the lap of the talent. The talent can only do so much. And sometimes, unfortunately for them, and I know this is not something that they do on purpose, but some of the talent on the roster adversely affects the others. Just by them being there. Having a mixed roster like that probably does not do anything for wrestling media wanting to cover it. When the perception of WoW's roster is just actresses and models that just signed up to be wrestlers on TV. Now, we know that's not true, at least not in total. There's people there who have lots of experience. But there are also people out there who don't know that there's women on that roster with lots of experience. They don't know person that had 15 plus years experience on that thing from someone who had 6 months. And that is the absolute truth. I mean, I've sat there and watched people make comments about veterans who didn't do anything wrong in the ring. They just think they did something wrong because other people did something wrong. And so they start looking for everything to be wrong. I mean, I really wish some people out there that could try that experiment. just watch it with somebody who's a novice. If you could get that done like 3 times in a row, just to see how they react to it. But not to get off track. Those were my personal reasons. The WoW Championship isn't perceived as important. WoW doesn't utilize or apply standard metrics for growth in pro wrestling promotions. Perceived as too campy and more of a television show than a wrestling promotion. The TV production schedule, no record of success or star making. The owner isn't capable to help improvement. Inconsistent storylines and angles. And David McLane himself. But those are my reasons. And since I got that sent to me or discussed a couple of times since it was brought up in one of the previous podcasts. I felt like this was as good a topic to talk about as any. You have any responses to any of this, please feel free to contact as you have been, or you can leave your comments below. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to the WPN's Rights and Wrongs of Pro Wrestling. If you have questions or comments, please contact us via our Facebook or our YouTube channel at the Women's Pro Wrestling Network. If you're new to the WPN, feel free to subscribe to our channel and like our page. We appreciate your support. Thank you again for listening.